The Suicide Squad, out in theaters and on HBO Max, new film directed by James Gunn, starring Margot Robbie, Idris Elba, John Cena, Joel Kinnaman, Viola Davis, Daniela Melchior, David Dastmalchian, Sylvester Stallone as a voice performance of King Shark, Michael Rooker, Nathan Fillion, Jay Courtney, Pete Davidson, Sean Gunn, Peter Capaldi, and a tiny cameo by Taika Waititi. Now, you may be wondering, haven't I seen this exact same film already 5 years ago? Well, yes and no. So in 2016, a movie called Suicide Squad, without the, was first released. A superhero film in the DC universe, concentrating on a group of villains working together as a Black Ops squad, originally envisioned by director David Ayer as this dark, serious, adult movie. It was eventually ruined, presumably by massive studio interference. During production, they insisted on making the film more lighthearted, more fun, to kind of replicate the success of Guardians of the Galaxy. And then they did reshoots, re-editing. Famously, the final edit was actually done not by the director or the editor, but by the company that produced the trailers for the film, which is mind-boggling. And the result was a colossal critical failure. The film was massacred by the critics and the fans as well. It was barely watchable. Everything about it was garbage, from the plot through dialogue, editing, characterization, and overuse of popular songs in every single scene to kind of emulate Guardians, to wonky CGI. Famously, the film has even been used in numerous video essays in the internet as an example of bad editing. Editors literally show scenes from this film while teaching what not to do. And some of it is in fact quite educational, so I recommend checking those out if you're into filmmaking. But nonetheless, the movie made a ton of money, which meant a sequel of sorts was bound to happen eventually. But then James Gunn was fired from Disney, the writer and director of the Guardians of the Galaxy films, and Warner Brothers saw this opportunity, and they approached him and essentially said, why don't you come work for us? You can make a Suicide Squad sequel, and we will give you money, and we will also give you complete creative freedom. He accepted, and in the process, the film changed from a straight sequel to a kind of partly sequel, partly soft reboot. To put it simply, you absolutely don't need to see the previous one, thankfully, because it's a new story, although a couple of characters return, most notably, of course, Harley Quinn. The final title this time around is The Suicide Squad. And here's the thing, it's actually really good this time around. It feels like, without studio interference and with the right person behind the helm, well, James Gunn got pretty much everything right about what this film needed to be in order for it to work. So the premise is very similar once again. The titular Suicide Squad is a Black Ops team recruited by Amanda Waller from supervillains rotting away in prison. They're all offered a deal. Do a dangerous mission for me, and if you succeed, we will knock off 10 years from your prison sentence. If you fail, you die. If you decide to double-cross or run away, you die. They put an explosive in your skull and just detonate it. And they're using villains because they want to have plausible deniability. So in case they get caught, the US government can always say, this was not us, this is just some random supervillains. So this time around, the mission is to infiltrate Corto Maltese, find a guy who's a scientist working on a top secret Project Starfish, infiltrate that project, the building that it houses it, with the help of this guy, and destroy any and all traces of it. So the question begs itself, if the premise is so similar, what makes the movie work this time around if it was such a dud previously? And the answer is, most broadly, execution. First of all, the movie really taps into the idea of the Suicide Squad. At the beginning, we meet all of those ridiculous, obscure characters, only for them to start dying almost immediately. There are a lot of deaths in this film. I mean, really, only a couple of people make it to the end. And some of the characters are obvious candidates, but some of the big names die as well, without spoiling anything, of course. One thing that's cool about all those deaths is that, on the one hand, the creative manner of them, and the fact that the film is R-rated now, so it gets very bloody and gory and goes wild with the violence, which is great. But secondly, I think all the deaths serve the plot in some way. Some of them are purely comedic, some of them serve to kind of set the stage and advance the story, but some of them genuinely hit me. Like, I found myself going, no, I wanted this character to survive. I like this guy or girl. And here we get to the biggest difference between the two Suicide Squads, I think, which is the characterization. So in the 2016 version, pretty much every single character there was made to be edgy and cool, and actually in reality not villains at all, but tortured heroes who wanted to do good, but the circumstances forced them to be villains, which was boring as fuck. James Gunn takes these characters and he makes it very clear that these are absolute selfish assholes. They're not good people, they don't shy away from senseless violence and hurting innocents and betraying one another, but also they're for the most part utter idiots, or crazies, or both. And that dynamic means it's much more fun to watch the movie throughout. All of the characters are just much more real and believable, despite of course being ridiculous comic book characters, and you just begin to like them quite quickly. It was surprising to me the extent to which I began to sympathize with those dudes and cheer for them and be sad when they were killed off. Just a couple of examples, the most obvious ones. Idris Elba is fantastic as the constantly incredulous Bloodsport, just being incredibly frustrated with the antics of all the other team members. John Cena is very funny but also kind of terrifying as Peacemaker, who is basically an asshole version of Captain America. There's also a stark difference between how dull Joel Kinnaman was as Rick Flag previously and how amazingly cool and likable he is now. And the list just goes on and on and on. I think every single character is funny or cool or enjoyable in their own way. The writing is just very solid. I was afraid after the trailer especially that the humor specifically would be kind of low level, toilet level humor, but that's not the case at all. And the same thing could be said about the technical aspects of the film. The cinematography is very good. There's a clear difference between the early parts of the film with the prison and the night assault on the beach, which are dark and washed off color, and then Corto Maltese proper. That's sunny and colorful and very, very lively. The color palette in general is quite wide, and that makes the different chapters and sequences really stand out from each other. There's also a cool thing done with the chapter titles. They're kind of incorporated in the cinematography, either as, for example, writing on the sand, or flames, or rooftop pipes and wires and things creating letters. Just nice touch. Similar thing goes for the music. Once again, we have many cool songs on the soundtrack, as would be expected of James Gunn after Guardians. But I think compared to the previous Suicide Squad, they're used much more tastefully, and also those are not the most obvious songs, but something, you know, that you may not necessarily know as a song. So yeah, unexpectedly, overall, this has been a very fun ride. It's funny, it's exciting, it's entertaining, looks great, sounds great. The characters are well written and well performed, and most of all, I did care about all of them and their dynamics, which made the entire film flow quite well. Huge success for DC.